2 points today, one regarding mass media and independent media. The other point is that we will have no hope of ever getting anything done with progressives who are still Democrats. This first article addresses both points. Common Dreams, a supposedly independent media source, are bragging that Omar and Tlaib were credited as major factors in securing Biden victories in Minnesota and Michigan. They're holding them up as champions, progressive champions, because they helped get a corporatist elected president. If either of them were to run for president next time outside of the Democratic Party, I'd vote for them. But as long as they're stuck inside the Democratic Party, they, like AOC and like Bernie Sanders, are going to continue to suck up to the corporate powers. And they're going to continue to suck up to the corporate politicians who are paid for by those powers. This article is by Kenny Stansel, a staff writer, and the caption under the photo reads, "Just so we are clear," said Representative-elect Jamal Bowman of New York on November 4th, 2020, Representative Ilhan Omar, right, and Representative Rashida Tlaib, left, were major factors in delivering Minnesota and Michigan for Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. Woo! So even though this article says that they're part of the progressive squad, I don't see how you can call yourself a progressive if you're trying to get Joe fucking Biden elected. And that goes double for soon-to-be President Kamala Harris. Congresswomen Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, members of the progressive squad in the U.S. House who represent districts in the states of Michigan and Minnesota respectively, received applause and praise Thursday for their role in lifting Joe Biden in those two battleground states, pivotal victories that have helped put the former vice president on the verge of ousting President Donald Trump. Among the nation's most progressive legislators, Omar represents Minneapolis and its nearby suburbs, while Tlaib represents portions of Detroit and some of its suburbs in Wayne County. Both lawmakers campaigned heavily for Biden leading up to this week's election, and observers say Biden's victories in those states may not have materialized had it not been for that heavy lifting which propelled huge turnout in diverse districts. While the Biden-Harris campaign resisted in-person canvassing, Omar's campaign kept doing it, hiring dozens of people to knock on doors and pull out votes, the Washington Post reported earlier this week. Ken Martin, the chairman of Minnesota's Democratic Farmer Labor Party, told the Post that Omar doesn't need to increase turnout here to win her race. She could take a vacation and she'd get reelected easily. But, Martin added, she recognizes that she has a responsibility to drive up turnout. It's really important for all of our statewide races, especially the presidential race. Now, this is me speaking. If you want to argue with me about the importance of down-ballot races, that's great, as long as these down-ballot races don't produce progressives who end up getting sucked into the power vortex. I readily admit that it's easier to avoid that power vortex when you're in local elections than if you get sucked up into the nationwide elections. Back to the story. According to Martin, Omar does really intensive face-to-face contacts with a lot of personal relationship building and building long-term power with communities of color, something that a lot of politicians don't do. And again, that's great as long as you're not sheepdogging them into the corrupt Democratic fold. As of now, Ilhan, that's what you're doing. You're sheepdogging. Tlaib also is no stranger to organizing in her district. Direct voter contact wins elections, Tlaib tweeted on Wednesday night. Our team knocked doors, called and texted residents, and registered folks who had never voted before. You get what you organize for, Omar pointed out on social media on Thursday afternoon. And in Minnesota, we organized for massive turnout, which the Congresswoman claimed is at a staggering 88% in my district so far. Minnesota may have highest voter turnout in the country. A spokesperson within Secretary of State Steve Simon's office said there were approximately 3.1 million votes cast in the election. Just so we are clear, said Representative-elect Jamal Bowman of New York, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib were major factors in delivering Minnesota and Michigan for Joe Biden. In a late September op-ed in the Post, Omar argued that Democrats ought to focus on engaging non-voters with ambitious egalitarian policies in order to perform better going forward. I have seen the media and even Democrats fall for Trump's argument that Omar's left-wing stances will benefit Republicans, she lamented. We need to win over former Trump voters, the thinking goes, and we can't do that if we embrace progressive leaders and policies. But while winning swing voters is important, there is a key constituency Democrats need in November that is almost entirely left out of the conversation: non-voters, she wrote. At an event in North Minneapolis last week, Omar told supporters, "It is our votes here that are going to make sure not only that we strongly win this state, but that we don't see Trump's face ever again." Sarah Alawi, a PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and a volunteer with Arab Americans for Biden, a grassroots coalition working to elect Biden, told HuffPost, "I think we really hit the message home that this election is unlike any other election." This is me talking. That was the argument we debunked yesterday, that the best we can do is to mitigate the damage in these times that are unprecedented. But they're not unprecedented. We always will have evil Republicans to resist. After 4 years of Biden or Harris, who knows what kind of Trump we're going to get next. So the rest of the article addresses how we got Muslims to show up for Biden, and I'm glad that Muslims are voting, but I'm not glad that they're voting for Biden. I don't think our movement means shit unless we can figure out how to get Muslims to vote for progressives. And at this point, progressives who are not Democrats, because otherwise this kind of bullshit is going to keep happening. We're going to have really engaging, well-intentioned young politicians doing the dirty work for the assholes up above them. I don't know how Common Dreams can report this as a good thing. So before I bite my tongue in half, I'm going to switch over to Caitlyn Johnstone. Greenwald's Intercept resignation exposes the rot in all mass media. Journalist Glenn Greenwald has made major waves throughout mainstream and alternative media by resigning from The Intercept, an outlet he co-founded in 2014 with the stated mission of holding power to account with the power of unrestricted journalism. Greenwald says he resigned because Intercept editors refused to let him publish an article he'd been working on about the mass media's role in covering up the Hunter Biden October surprise and obfuscating its nature, which he says is a violation of the conditions in his contract for editorial freedom. He also published part of the email exchanges he'd been having with the editors in the lead-up to submitting his notice of resignation. This is a Glenn Greenwald tweet. "My resignation from The Intercept. The same trends of repression, censorship, and ideological homogeneity plaguing the national press generally have engulfed the media outlet I co-founded, culminating in censorship of my own articles." The email exchanges make it fairly clear that Intercept editors were holding Greenwald's analysis of the allegations against Joe Biden and his family to a much higher evidentiary standard than they hold any journalist who wants to criticize Trump or promote flimsy Russia conspiracy theories on the platform, and generally creating pressure and inertia to remove anything in the article that might hurt Biden's election chances. Journalist Matt Taibbi has his own article out on Greenwald's resignation, which contains more information on the email exchanges and which is very much worth reading. More revealing than the emails is the information which Greenwald shares in his Substack article about his resignation, saying, "The Intercept has been deliberately opaque about those who are responsible for the Reality Winner debacle and the actions they took which led to her arrest when leaking NSA documents to the outlet." Greenwald claims editors rushed the publication of the leaks because they were eager to prove mainstream media outlets and prominent liberals that The Intercept was willing to get on board the Russiagate train, and says their silence has allowed the blame to fall on him for Winner's imprisonment despite his having nothing to do with the ordeal. This is me talking. A lot of us were wondering whether he was on the Russiagate train because of The Intercepts being on the Russiagate train, and it's good to see after the fact that he wasn't. Back to Caitlyn. Greenwald also reveals that The Intercept refused to report on the daily proceedings of the Julian Assange extradition hearing because the freelance reporter doing an outstanding job was politically distasteful. It's unclear exactly what was meant by this. Greenwald has praised the excellent Assange trial coverage by Shadowproof's Kevin Gosztola and Richard Medhurst, now of Press TV, in the past, both of whom say they don't at this time know who he was referring to. Regardless of what he meant, refusal of a media outlet whose motto is fearless adversarial journalism to cover the single most important journalistic freedom case in the world is outrageous on its face. Back to me again, I'll point out that in the comments under my videos, I get criticized for reading out loud conservative opinions that are actually on the money. Truth is truth, people. If it's true, then you have to deal with it. You can't just sneeringly and condescendingly wave your hand when you don't like the source of information that's true. The Intercept editors called Greenwald's criticisms a grown person throwing a tantrum in a remarkably snarky statement on their website, claiming on what appears to be no basis that their co-founder was attempting to recycle the dubious claims of a political campaign, the Trump campaign. We have the greatest respect for the journalist Glenn Greenwald used to be, and we remain proud of much of the work we did with him over the past 6 years, the editors wrote. It is Glenn who has strayed from his original journalistic roots, not the Intercept. Boo! What a huge, heaping, stinking pile of dog shit. And that goes for you, Naomi Klein. Back to the story. These accusations are fully in line with the smears you can read from the blue checkmarked commentariat by typing in Greenwald's name into the Twitter search bar on every given day. Establishment spinmeisters have been painting Greenwald as a closet Trump supporter who stumbled his way into useful idiocy for the Kremlin ever since the award-winning journalist began questioning the establishment Russia narrative, and his statement is plainly both informed by and designed to appeal to acolytes of that smear campaign. Contrary to its claims of adhering to its journalistic roots, The Intercept has in fact been going down the tubes for as long as I've been at this commentary gig. Its coverage on Syria has been blatant security state stenography. It has published hit pieces on Assange. Its sources keep getting arrested, and it has been promoting Russiagate with all the fervor of any garden variety corporate liberal rag. So the fact that it has joined with the freakishly unified narrative management campaign on the Hunter Biden story and is now citing unsubstantiated assertions by US spooks to do so is not terribly surprising. Matt Taibbi tweets, when Intel officials decried the recent Post story, they wrote, "We do not have evidence of Russian involvement." The recent Intercept story, quoting the letter, left out that line. And this is me speaking. We talked about that in a previous episode. The Intercept has fallen victim to the same decay as all other outlets past a certain size and funding level. Matt Taibbi, who says he's spoken to multiple well-known journalists who are encountering similar pressures as those Greenwald encountered in the lead-up to the US election, wrote the following in his aforementioned article. The traditional method of controlling the press, as described by legendary independent journalists like I.F. Stone, was the quiet aside by the boss, a little private talk, where a hint that the reporter seems irresponsible, a little bit radical, would be dropped. Getting the message and fearing for his or her job, the reporter backs off. Or, in cases like the Iraq War run-up, the strategic dismissal or unhiring of a big name with the wrong views, Phil Donahue, Jesse Ventura, makes sure the rest of the employees get the message. Greenwald co-founded The Intercept with this exact scenario in mind, building a structure where little private talks with bosses would never happen, and there couldn't be high-profile dismissals for ideological reasons. What he didn't guess at was that even in an atmosphere where managerial interference is near zero, a collective of independent journalists can themselves become censors and enforcers of official orthodoxies. In some cases, journalists will become more aggressive propagandists and suppressors of speech than the officials from whom they supposedly need to be protected. This is what happened with The Intercept. That was fucking brilliant. I think that's what happens with lefty pundits, independent pundits. I think we censor ourselves. This is a Glenn Greenwald tweet. I really enjoyed my 3-hour discussion yesterday with @Joe Rogan. A wide range of issues, media censorship in general and on Biden, free speech erosions, surveillance, and privacy. What responsibilities come with a public platform? Just raw and honest discourse. People will cite all sorts of reasons for The Intercept running cover for intelligence agencies and powerful politicians, including its Omidyar funding and the possibility of government infiltration. but I think the primary source of the decay of The Intercept is much more basic. Having large, well-funded news media outlets simply is not conducive to good reporting. Powerful people pour so very much energy into manipulating how the masses think, act, and vote, and news reporters are constantly interfacing with that severely polluted stream of information. For this reason, the most heavily propagandized people in the world are those who are responsible for distributing propaganda, namely the news media. As the final guardians of society's incredible shrinking Overton window, reporters are necessarily the group who will be most aggressively pushed within that window. If, as Upton Sinclair says, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it, then surely that is especially true of those who've spent their working lives learning what frameworks of understanding help them ascend to prominence in the sphere of journalism. This would have shaped them long before they arrived at any outlet which purports to promote fearless adversarial journalism, and it would continue shaping them as they interact with fellow journalists. This, combined with a dominant plutocrat-funded media system designed to streamline journalistic thought into mainstream establishment orthodoxies, creates a kind of conformity conveyor belt that journos get processed through like the schoolchildren in the video for Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall. The dominant worldview in any collective of journalists is statistically likely to be a mainstream worldview simply because it's more common by its very nature. Mainstream worldviews are only mainstream because vast amounts of wealth and effort went into shoving them into the mainstream by sheer force for the benefit of the rich and powerful, whose kingdoms are built upon the capitalist imperialist status quo. If you set out to just hire a bunch of journalists who seem good to you, you're necessarily going to get a lot of people unwittingly promoting the interests of the rich and powerful just by sheer statistical probability. And this is me talking. That's the same problem we have with a bunch of new politicians who seem good, but they get shoved into this power vortex. And they unwittingly become part of the power structure. Back to Caitlyn. When you take all these factors together and throw them into a large media outlet full of journalists, our primitive impulses to conform with the pack kick in, and the consensus worldview has a much easier time overtaking critical thought even further than it already has. Additionally, when you gather news reporters together in a large outlet, you're going to attract the attention of powerful forces who have a vested interest in controlling how the news is reported. If you can use your leverage and/or resources to manipulate how that entire outlet reports, then that's energy well spent. All this to say, decentralization is going to have to be the way forward for good critical journalism. There are so few reporters who haven't been digested by the conformity conveyor belt, and if you stick them with the groupthink herd, they're going to be squeezed until they either fall in line or leave. Stop trying to throw the few alive ones in with the zombies and let them go out on their own or in small groups. They'll be much harder to influence and they can do a lot more damage to the lie factory. That's my fondest hope, dear viewers and listeners, that I can damage the lie factory. And when you promote journalists like Caitlyn Johnstone and Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, that's what you're doing too. I don't know if the best way to make a living doing that is with paid Substack subscriptions like Greenwald and Taibbi, or more like my own Patreon-based model, or with some other approach we haven't thought of yet. This is me talking. I just started to put my PayPal link underneath my videos and podcasts. Back to Caitlyn. I just know that every time we cluster up in groups, we bog ourselves down and make ourselves an easy target for the machine. It's clear with the decay of The Intercept that we're better off finding ways to let our own skills and insight guide us down our own paths towards this journalism thing, while the conformity drones rot in their well-funded outlets. The audiences will be there. Truth is attractive to people. Serving power is not. I don't know that the Hunter Biden October surprise shows anything more scandalous than you'd expect for any major U.S. presidential nominee. I do know that the uniform conspiracy of silence and obfuscation from the mass media about it is uniquely scandalous and says bad things about the future of journalism in Western news media. We can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them. Drastic changes are desperately needed.